Late night scare. A little backstory. Back when I first moved into the state I currently live in, I had done a bit of couch surfing before finally being able to find a roommate. We moved into a rather old apartment in the quieter part of the big city. When I say old, I mean radiator heating, electricity so bad that running too many things in sockets popped the breaker, etc. I was the first to move in because my roommate had not yet gotten into the state. They were moving from Arizona. I had no furniture or anything, so I was sleeping on the floor. By default, I always close the door to the room I'm sleeping in. Force of habit, even if I am alone in a place. One thing I noticed about the door is that it took quite a bit of force to get it shut. No big deal, I got it closed, went to bed, and that was that. When I woke up, the door was wide open. I found it strange because I had gave the door a little tug before bunkering down on the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time until it kept happening. After a while, I noticed the apartment started to have a weird feeling. About a week later, my roommate finally arrived and moved in. On and off, weird things would happen outside of the door being opened when I would wake up. There were sounds of someone rustling in the kitchen, footsteps long after both me and my roommate went to bed. I would know if it was them, because they always turned the hallway lights on when going to the bathroom or kitchen. For the 1.5 years we lived there, that seemed to be the only bit of disturbances. Nothing major. Fast forward to a year later, and I had a friend from Colorado come visit for a week. The night had crept up on us, and we were going to hit downtown the following morning rather early. So we turned in for the night. They slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. I went to my room and shut the door firmly. I passed out rather quickly. I was only out for an hour before I was awakened by a creaking noise and the jiggling of my bedroom's door handle. I opened my eyes only to watch the door slowly open and then stop after it was wide opened. I assumed that maybe I just didn't shut it properly, but it still felt weird. I got up, closed the door, pulled the hood of the hoodie I was wearing to bed up because it was freezing and in the dead of winter, and curled up back in bed. Only a few minutes had passed before I felt something snatch hold of the hood of my hoodie and yank back as if trying to tug me along with it. I went stone still and felt my heart racing. I had no idea what was happening, and I know I wasn't dreaming. Once everything had settled, my nerves included, I tried to get a little more sleep. Morning came, and I went out of my room to meet my friend who was just waking up. I asked them if they heard my door opening at all during the night. They were confused, answered no, and got up for their morning routine. I cannot explain what happened. I may have been amping myself up out of fear, or it could have very well been a spirit in that apartment. Both are plausible, but it doesn't take away just how scary it was in the moment. I think about it now and then. And if I am going to be honest, I am so glad I moved out of that apartment later that year. Linked nightmares. Growing up, my little brother and I shared everything. A room, an Xbox, we even shared the same cell phone for a few years. Never thought we would share the same nightmare. This was way back in 2013. I remember it because I was excited to see Iron Man 3. The movie sucked, but it was fun seeing all the different suits. Anyway, we ended up passing out late that night after a few rounds of Call of Duty. This is when I had one of the scariest nightmares of my life. I remember being in my bed and just lying there not able to move. My chest felt heavy, and my head was turned towards my little brother's bed. All I could see was this figure creeping over my little brother's sleeping body. It was tall and thin and completely cloaked in Grim Reaper-type robe. Its back was facing me, and I could hear this thing breathing while it reached its shadowy clawed hand toward my little brother's face. I tried screaming, but nothing came out. It reaches out and picks him up while he's still asleep. I try to move, but it feels like there's an elephant on my chest. This thing straightens its back while it stands up, holding my brother in his arms. It turns to face me, and its face was, well, it was and wasn't there. Its face was this constantly moving shadow that looked like a silk cloth with frayed edges. The edges looked like a flickering flame, but there was no light. It stared down at me and whispered something I didn't hear. Tears are streaming down my cheeks while this thing turns and walks into the wall, vanishing from sight while still holding my brother. I'm trying with everything I have to stand up, but it feels like all the energy was sucked out of me. I close my eyes, and then I wake up. I was sweating everywhere and stood up immediately. I look at my brother's bed and he's still asleep. I start pacing around and popping my knuckles, thinking about what the hell I just dreamt about. I wipe my sweaty hands on my boxers and grab my towel to take a shower. Before I head to the bathroom, my brother sits up and just looks at me. I look back at him and said, "Hey man, glad you're okay. I just had the most fucked up dream about you." He looked at me with an exhausted expression and said, "I had a fucked up dream too. Some monster thing kidnapped me and I couldn't move. You didn't do anything but cry and go back to sleep." I stood there in shock. Did he and I have the same dream? I asked him, did the monster look like the Grim Reaper with a weird shadow face? I swear it looked like he just shit his pants when I said this. He nods and says, "Yeah." "Did you see it too?" I nodded and told him about my dream. We both had the same dream with the same details, just from different points of view. We still have no clue how we were able to share a dream or what that sinister shadow figure was. I still think about that dream and I can still remember its void of a face. Next story. My first sleep paralysis experience, I saw a demon. One night I was laying in my bed and I decided to go to sleep. For some reason I didn't feel like I was asleep. It felt like I was having a dream in a dream, like I was asleep having a dream, but in that dream having a dream, if that makes sense. Really weird concept. Sleep paralysis is weird. In that dream in the dream, I hear the TV in the other room, and it's playing true crime. And I wake up from the dream in a dream. I think to shut off the TV, but I'm too tired, so I go to sleep. I'm asleep while this is happening. And I finally get to sleep, but I start to sense a presence in the room. So I look to my right in the room. There is a black figure standing all the way to the ceiling like Slender Man. I thought to myself, is that Slender Man? When you're having sleep paralysis, you're kind of conscious, but at the same time you're not, and you can't move at all for those who don't know. After I see this figure around 15 feet tall, I'm not really sure as to what I'm seeing, so I'm kind of confused. He shrinks to like a normal human size, and he's wearing a suit. He then starts moving his arms slowly, though, like in slow motion, looking like he's running. I'm still confused as to what I'm seeing because I wasn't sure if it was real. In a matter of a second, the figure is on top of me, and he grabs onto me. I feel a vibration go through my body like I've never felt before in my entire life. It felt very spiritual, because spiritual beings have a vibration that we don't feel normally. So it's like a shock through your system. The demon looked like super skinny, had a really bony spine and was staring right at me. He was also pretty hunched back. And I couldn't move at all. I was internally freaking out, thinking I was screwed. I couldn't believe what was happening was actually happening. I couldn't register it. I finally somehow shook myself awake and I was freaking out. I could not sleep the rest of the night and I didn't feel safe. I felt like something was watching me. Next story. Home Alone story. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off at around 3 p.m, and my parents would be home around 4:30. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mum, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even be dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. Today it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. No one should have been here until like 7 p.m. My house is set up to where my upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. No one I know drives a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or someone my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Soon after, I hear a knock at the door. Then another. I go to my other window, that has a better view of the walkway, up to my front door. I see the guy walking back down the walkway. I switch and go back to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I'm relaying all of this to Seth, still with my mic on. I tell Seth that he's walking back to his truck now. Instead, he walks past his truck and tries to open my garage side door. At this point, my heart sinks. I tell Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house. Mind you, it is literally broad day, at like 5 p.m. Luckily it was locked, because sometimes we forget to lock it. After he tried the door, he starts walking to my back patio. I drop my headset and I quietly run downstairs to see what he is doing. I get downstairs and stand behind the wall so I'm not visible from the back door, living room windows. I just listen. I hear him try to open the door. Then I hear a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I'm more scared than I've ever been. I wanted to call my parents or Grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross my living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner and he was gone. I run back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I'm telling him this, I hear a car door shut. This time when I look out the window, he finally got in his truck. I looked at the truck closer, and I noticed the only thing he has in his truck bed was a crowbar and shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate. He was parked to where I couldn't see it. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I get to the back door and see that the doormat was moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key. Holy fuck. We have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch, and all the pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I would have done if he was able to find the key, or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over, and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. Came across an incredibly creepy family a while back. In around 2018, 2019, I, 25 female, at the time I was 18, 19, living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in Nebraska, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride four-wheelers on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, etc. Plus, his parents were super cool and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, even though I am quite scared of the dark. So I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbour was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to or from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding, two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you pass one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch-black road with thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3, a tall, slim woman, an average height-weight man, a child, short hair but couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing and couldn't see their face, maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a fucking stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered, but not nice. They also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street, the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking, had music playing, etc. They didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me, and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane. Or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all at the same time stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Next story. Still creeps me out every time I think of it. Spooky. A few years ago, fall, early winter of 2019, we were staying with my husband's father. We rented, moved into a house a couple of months later, but had been staying there less than a week at the time this happened. I slept in the living room on an air mattress with our kids, ages 10, 5 and 1. The kitchen, dining room and living room were all open space. There was a wide counter and sink that was a bar on the living room side. He never had stools or used it like that, though, always had a sofa pushed right up to it, and had storage for dishes and whatever in the kitchen side. On each end of that counter, there was about 4 or 5 feet of open space between it and the wall. Along the wall directly opposite the front door were 3 doors. Father-in-law's bedroom, bathroom, spare room, from left to right. My husband slept on the tiny spare bed. His dad kept the door to his room closed and usually had a TV and, depending on the weather, either a space heater, window AC unit, or at least one fan going. I don't remember if my husband had the door to the room he was sleeping in open or closed that night. Except for that back wall where the bedrooms and bathroom were, the house had windows all the way around it. Large, floor-to-ceiling windows along the front, and a line of large sliding windows along each side wall. It was originally built as a sort of camp, getaway cabin. Windows of view. Apparently, he disagreed and was in the process of building a front porch and replacing about half of those windows with wall. However, at the time the porch was still being built and none of the windows had been changed or taken out yet. This particular night, I was holding my 18-months-old with a child on each side of us. We had all been asleep for a while when I woke up. I'm not sure what time it was, but the house was mostly quiet and no one else was awake. I lay there, quietly, without moving around, for a little while and couldn't figure out why I was awake at all, much less so alert. Not long after I decided it was just one of those sleep cycles, blah, blah, blah. I was about to try to go back to sleep. Someone knocked on the front door. Not a loud, banging, beating knock, but definitely a knock. The air mattress was in the middle of the living room area, and the door was on the kitchen side of that dividing counter. I really didn't want to answer the door for multiple reasons. Was in the middle of 3 sleeping children. It was late. It was cold, and we were cosy and warm, all snuggled together. It wasn't my house. No one else seemed to notice someone was knocking. The knocking went on for longer than I would have knocked on someone's door in the middle of the night, and did get more persistent, though never did turn into banging. No one called out for somebody to answer the door, and no one's cell rang. Finally, I heard someone walking down the unfinished porch. They had stacked some boards and tools and stuff against the front of the house. I heard no clatters or thumps or anything like that, but it did sound like whoever was out there was having to walk on and around those building materials. And then I heard a distinct and firm tapping on the window closest to the kids and me. There was a small older TV and a small stereo speaker sitting on 2 small tables between the air mattress and the windows. I was facing away from the window, but the tapping was right there where our heads were. An entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, and the tapping was done only in the area that would have been in my direct line of sight if I hadn't been facing the other direction. I don't think I took a single breath until it stopped, and I heard footsteps walking away, and they walked across tin, all the way to the end of the porch, where the driveway was. Walking across sheets of tin makes a pretty distinct sound. I know exactly what it sounds like when someone walks on tin. What I did not realise until the next morning was that the only sheets of tin out there were all red in place because they had finished putting it up as a roof over the porch before stopping for the evening, which meant that there were no sheets of tin stored against the wall under the windows with those boards and tools and whatever else that was there. The only way for someone or something to have walked across those sheets of tin, which I am certain beyond the shadow of a doubt, that I heard happening after hearing an unknown someone knock and tap for so long it became unsettling rather than annoying, would have been for them to jump, swing up onto the top of the house, porch, from an incomplete porch floor, and then jump back down at the end. It scares me in a way nothing else ever has, and still does every single time I accidentally think about it. And that's why I'm typing this right now. And probably also why an owl chose just now to let loose the most terrifying, un-owl-like sound. Next story. True EMS horror story. I worked as a dispatcher for a pretty small ambulance station near a fairly large city in the middle of the US, and I'm going to tell one of the craziest stories I have from this job. We had a patient who we will call Susan. She was a dialysis patient, and one of the services we offered was to take very unwell or disabled patients to and from these dialysis appointments. She lived with her son, who we will call David. He was in his late 40s, and his mother, Susan, in her late 70s. Every week, like clockwork, we would have a unit bring Susan to and from her dialysis treatments 3 times a week. Everyone knew her at the station because we had been doing this for quite some time with Susan. We were all familiar with her and her son, whether it was the crew seeing her in person and taking care of her, or speaking to her or her son on the phone frequently about the appointments as I had done. Everyone knew her. Naturally, when crews had news about her health, they would report back to keep everyone in the loop with how she was. At one point she was not feeling well at all, but she wanted to go to her dialysis appointment, so naturally we obliged and took her in. At this appointment, while receiving dialysis treatment, she lost consciousness and was promptly taken by our crew to the hospital. When it was time again for her dialysis appointment, we gave the hospital a call to see if she had been released and was able to go to the appointment. The hospital staff informed us that she would likely be released the following day and would be receiving that dialysis treatment in the hospital. Then the next treatment time rolled around and we called the hospital and we were told she had been released from their care the other day. This was great news, but a little strange due to the fact that we were always her first call to transport her to or from any hospital or appointment, and we hadn't transported her anywhere. We quickly moved on, however, and called David, her son, to see if she was going to be requiring us for her treatment that day. He informed us she wasn't feeling well and that she wasn't up to it, but that he was considering taking her back into the hospital. We tell him that if he needs us to just give us a call, and until further notice we cancel her trip for the day. We never get a call. Next appointment rolls around and we call David again to ask if she will be going. He says she's sick and she's back in the hospital. Weird again, since we hadn't taken her, but doesn't seem that off, considering her health had been deteriorating. Next appointment, same thing happens. We call David, his mum's in the hospital, we move on. Now is where things took a bit of a turn. When the next appointment came up, we had tried calling David to ask about his mother's status, but he never answered or returned our calls. So, being that we had a contract with Susan and were to take her to these appointments unless told otherwise, we sent a crew to collect her for treatment. When the crew arrived at scene, they knocked on the door, to no response. They knocked again and were greeted by David smoking a cigarette. David seeming surprised, the crew said they were there to pick up Susan for her appointment. David responded stating he had forgotten to call, but Susan was still in the hospital not doing well. The crew gave their best wishes and David shut the door, but the crew felt like something was off. They immediately radioed to dispatch that something was wrong and they requested we call the hospital. David said she was at to see if she was still there. The hospital had no record of her being there since we last knew, so we had the crew leave the scene and we called for a welfare check on Susan at her son's home. We heard nothing the rest of the day from police, David, Susan or anyone else involved. The next morning I came into work and the very first call I took began with, "This is the sheriff. I'm calling to report back on the welfare check you asked us to perform yesterday." I was nervous as he sounded concerned and I didn't really expect them to call us back with any news. He proceeded to let me know that upon arrival to the home, they spoke with David, who was adamant his mother didn't feel well, but that she was home from the hospital. The police asked to just check on Susan to make sure she was all right, and eventually David obliged, letting the police in. Once entering the home, they were met with a grim scene, though I imagine they smelled it first. They continued to explain that what the officers observed was the dead body of Susan propped up on the couch wrapped in blankets, as if watching the television. But she had been dead for a while. They approximated around 2 weeks. When speaking to David, they found that he had been changing her clothes regularly and watching TV with her. But the thing was, he had never taken good care of her until she was dead. Stuff like this happens and you'll never know. Next story. Something came into my home and sat on my bed. Then I lost time. When I, 38 female, was 18, I lived in a suburb in Australia. Our house was the odd one out. On a street of 70s, 80s brick homes, ours was an Alpine-style weatherboard home with a steep roof built in the early 20th century. It was old, cold and noisy, and you could see the ground through the gaps in the floorboards. We had a big dog who stayed outside until everyone was home, and then slept outside in a big pen doghouse at night, mostly in the summer. We also have an indoor cat. The week it happened I was home alone. Dad was overseas, Mum and Sis were visiting family. One night when walking home from work I rounded the corner and noticed a figure standing on our carport roof, looking through a window into one of 3 upstairs bedrooms. The sun was setting, so all I could see was a dark silhouette. I yelled at it from the top of the driveway and it was gone. I remember thinking it odd that my dog didn't bark or notice anything. I went inside, checked the house, the dog, the windows and doors, etc., and everything seemed in place. I assumed I had just seen a shadow from a nearby tree at sunset. The following night I walked home from work, and everything seemed normal. I checked all windows and doors, let the dog inside for the evening and eventually put him and myself to bed. My bedroom was upstairs, down the hall from the room next to the carport roof. Before bed I had a routine of shutting all doors in the house, as they were all squeaky, and the drafts would often blow them closed if left open. This night I closed all doors, checked locks, turned off all the lights and went to sleep. In the middle of the night I was awoken by something, not sure what, but when I came to, focused my eyes and looked around, I saw the hallway light coming in under my door. I thought I turned it off, but perhaps I forgot. Right then my doorknob started rattling, like someone was struggling to open the door. I immediately lay back down on my side, facing the wall opposite my bed, and my heart starts beating hard. I hear the door open and close my eyes. I figured if someone is breaking in, I'll pretend I'm asleep and maybe they'll take what they want and leave. I slowly open one eye, the one against the pillow so it's less obvious. I see the light from the hallway on my wall. My bedroom door is fully open. My heart is beating harder. I lay still. I see the digital clock on my CD player and a little after 2 a.m. Then I hear the door creak again and watch as the light on the wall slowly starts to disappear. The bedroom door is closing. At this point, I'm positive we're being robbed, but I continue to pretend I'm asleep. Keeping one eye open, everything is heightened. The loudest noise is my heartbeat, but I try to listen through it and can't hear anything. No breathing, no footsteps, nothing. At this point, I begin to feel pressure around both my feet. The blanket is getting tighter around them, and I realize that something is now sitting on the end of my bed. I look at the clock again, and it's now a little before 3 a.m. I'm frozen, scared, and have no idea what's happening. At some point I have the idea to slowly readjust my position in bed and move my feet a little to see if something moves or happens. So I do this, but as I slowly readjust my feet, I feel one of them hit something solid. Something is definitely sitting on the end of my bed. I don't know what to do at this point, so I stay still and listen, while looking through one eye at the clock and the bedroom wall. The next thing I remember is hearing the first birds starting to chirp before sunrise. I look at the clock, and it's now a little before 6 a.m., and I notice the room is a little brighter. The sun is coming. Shortly after this, I feel the pressure lift from the end of the bed. I hear the bedroom door open, I see the light from the hallway on the wall again, and then the door shuts and the sun starts to rise. I got up shortly after this and checked the whole house. All doors and windows were locked. The dog had slept through the night and nothing from the house was missing. My cat was stuck in the bathroom overnight. He must have followed my in when I brushed my teeth without my noticing. I'm not sure what happened, but I won't forget that night in Noble Park.